Stepmom falsely accused me of assault to block my inheritance at 21. Dad believed her and cut me off. 7 years later, he learned the truth. When I was 21, my stepmother falsely accused me of assault to prevent me from inheriting my father's wealth. My dad believed her and cut me off. 7 years later, he discovered the truth. Hello, everyone. My biological parents divorced when I was 9, and they shared equal custody of me. I spent weekdays with my mom, who lived near my school, and weekends with my dad. Despite their separation, both parents were always kind and gentle towards me. While I was sad they were not together, I understood they both loved me deeply. A few years later, my dad met Gina, who would become my stepmother. When I was 11, my dad introduced her to me. She seemed nice, and my dad was clearly happy. He hoped we would get along well. Gina had twin daughters, Emma and Emily, who were 14 at the time. Raised without their father, the twins were quite immature and would throw public tantrums if they didn't get their way. As an introvert, I quietly observed their behavior. After a year of dating, my dad and Gina decided to marry when I was 12. Even my mom attended the wedding. I was excited to have a new family member. Initially, I thought my stepmother and I got along well. However, a few months after their honeymoon, she told me one morning that she didn't really like me. She said we needed to pretend to get along for my dad's sake when he was around. She also told me to stay out of her way when he wasn't there because she couldn't stand the sight of me, as I reminded her of my mom. Hearing her harsh words broke my heart. I had genuinely liked her and hoped for a good relationship. The twins overheard her and later teased me, saying my dad didn't love me and preferred them. I remember crying and telling my mom about it. She immediately called my dad and gave him an earful. My dad assured her that my stepmom would never say such things and that I must have misunderstood her. The following weekend, when I visited my father, my stepmother appeared upset. She stayed silent in front of my dad, but as soon as he left, she angrily whispered to me, threatening that she would ensure I no longer had a dad in my life if I ever told my mom anything about her. She also warned that she would divorce my dad and take all his money, leaving him destitute if I didn't keep quiet. At just 12 years old, I was terrified for my dad, so I nodded in agreement. From that day on, Gina made it her mission to make my life miserable in every way possible. Being a child, I felt I had to endure it silently. Whenever we were alone, she would say hurtful things to me and I would stay silent, hoping she would eventually stop bullying me. She would insult my height and weight, calling me ugly. I hoped my dad would notice, but he never did. He believed Gina and I had a good relationship and would often force me to go shopping and eat out with her and the kids. She would use my dad's card to pay for our meals, but wouldn't let me eat anything substantial at the restaurant. I was only allowed to have soup or dessert, no main course. I would sit there miserably, watching them finish their meals while crying quietly. I would return home hungry and she would force me to go to bed without eating. Many nights I cried myself to sleep, both hungry and exhausted from her cruelty. At that point, I was at my wit's end, scared, angry, and frustrated with both my stepmom and my dad. This is why I dreaded visiting my dad on weekends. Every Friday evening, I would try to avoid visiting by coming up with excuses like a stomachache so I could stay with my mom. My parents started noticing, and my dad would call, expressing sadness at not seeing me. My mom would urge me to tell her if something was wrong, but I always kept quiet, still scared of Gina's threats. When I was 14, my dad decided to take the whole family, including me, on a trip to Greece. Initially, I didn't want to go, but my mother told me it was a good opportunity to travel and see the world, so I reluctantly agreed to join them. As usual, Gina pretended to be sweet and kind in front of my dad, asking about school as if she genuinely cared. I noticed she would subtly tease me in her sweet voice, making hurtful comments that wouldn't outright portray her as mean. For example, whenever I mentioned playing basketball, she would joke that I needed to be sport, even though I was quite tall for my age. She would then say I should focus more on studies if I ever wanted to be successful. The twins would smirk and call me names like meathead, even though I had better grades than them. My dad would notice but choose to ignore it. Whenever I expressed that her comments hurt me, my dad insisted she was just teasing and that I should lighten up. Gina would nod and tell my dad that I had no sense of humor and needed to learn to have fun. This continued throughout the vacation. One day, in a moment of anger when she and the twins were teasing me about my weight while I was trying to enjoy the pool, I decided to retaliate. I told the twins that their double chins were embarrassing, watching their faces fall. I then turned to Gina and told her she shouldn't wear a shrug over her bikini because her huge stomach was still visible, making her look like a penguin. Gina's face turned red with embarrassment, and she ran back to the hotel room. The twins started yelling at me, calling me sexist and saying how horrible it was for me to say such things about them. Later, my dad confronted me, clearly angry. He asked if I had really spoken to my stepmother and stepsisters like that, and when I admitted it, he lectured me about how he had raised me better and that I should never talk to a woman about her weight. I argued back that they were criticizing my weight, looks, and height, but my dad forced me to apologize to Gina, who had locked herself in the bathroom crying after what I said. Gina and the twins made a big show of accepting my apologies. When I got home, I told my mom everything. She spoke to my dad, who tried to blame me for the whole situation. My mother threatened to call CPS on him if Gina ever commented on my weight or looks again. This scared my dad, and after that, Gina never said anything to me. However, she and the twins would blatantly ignore me whenever my dad wasn't around, which I honestly didn't mind. When I was 16, my mom went away for a few days, so I stayed with my dad and Gina. Gina complained about having to cook for one more person, so on my last night, I decided to make dinner since my mom had taught me to cook from a young age to be independent. Gina wanted to invite some friends over when she heard I was cooking. I prepared the meal, set the table, and served dinner. Everyone loved the food and praised me. My dad decided to do the dishes, so I went to my room. From there, I heard Gina and her friends talking loudly outside my window. Her friends were saying how lucky she was to have a nice husband and a great house. When they mentioned how nice it was that I cooked for them, Gina went on a rant about how annoying I was and that she couldn't stand seeing my face. She told her friends she couldn't wait until I was 18, so she wouldn't have to see me every weekend. When one of her friends mentioned again how nice I seemed, Gina admitted she had hoped I would fail at cooking so she could blame me for something. This shocked me because I was trying to be polite to her, even though I knew she hated me. As time went on, Gina's dislike for me only grew. During college, when I visited my dad for a few days at his insistence, Gina would completely ignore me. She would schedule family activities with just dad and twins or her and the twins, leaving me at home. If I woke up late during my vacation, she would yell at me, calling me lazy and inconsiderate, even though I always cleaned up after myself. I knew I was always respectful to her because my dad would be furious if I wasn't. Despite being polite and careful not to upset her, it felt like nothing I did was ever enough. She was also inconsiderate of my privacy. She would loudly enter my room while I was sleeping, waking me up or barging in without knocking, making me extremely uncomfortable. She would randomly search my room and look under my bed for reasons unknown to me. She refused to pick up dinner for me but did so for the family, never inviting me to join them. Despite this, I kept quiet, tried to stay out of the way, and spent time with Dad whenever possible. Now, on to the main incident. When I turned 21, my dad invited me to visit him, saying he had some important news to share. It had been a while since I last visited, so I felt a bit apprehensive, but my mother encouraged me, saying it was good news. I agreed and booked my tickets. Upon arrival, my dad greeted me warmly at the airport, and we drove back to his place. I asked him about the news, but he said he would reveal everything during the family dinner. When we arrived, I noticed the twins were home too. It had been a while since I had seen Emma and Emily. They didn't acknowledge my presence, and I didn't acknowledge theirs either. That night, during dinner, my dad started by expressing how proud he was to have 3 wonderful children. He spoke about his gratitude for having such a loving family and wanted to share some exciting news. The atmosphere was positive, and I felt a sense of anticipation as he continued speaking. He looked at each of us with a smile, including Gina, who had been giving me icy glares all day. My dad went on to say that he had recently lost a friend to a heart attack, which made him realize how lucky he was to have us. He had spoken to a lawyer and made a will. Upon hearing the word will, Gina and the twins perked up with excitement. Dad said he had decided to leave the house to my stepmom, as she was his wife. Gina beamed with pride and kissed him on the cheek. My dad's house was a 5-bedroom place, and if Gina ever decided to sell it, she could make a fortune. Dad then announced he was leaving his entire retirement account and his car to me. This wasn't just any car. It was a vintage car he had spent a lot of time and money maintaining. The car held sentimental value for both of us, as he often shared stories of his youth and adventures associated with it. As I processed this information, I realized that leaving the car to me was his way of expressing his love. As my dad spoke about his pride in me inheriting the car, Gina's expression shifted from pride to discontent. She exchanged glances with the twins, who seemed equally displeased. It was clear that the idea of me inheriting a significant sum of money and the beloved vintage car stoked their resentment. Dad, apparently unaware of the tension in the room, continued to explain how he would leave the joint bank account he shared with Gina to the twins. Since Gina was a homemaker, the money was entirely my dad's. He expressed his wish for the account to be equally divided between them, assuring them they would have money and a house to live in, so they needn't worry if anything happened to him. I thought this arrangement was fair and had no issues with it. However, the twins immediately voiced their disappointment, saying they had expected more. They argued that my dad should also leave them his retirement account, claiming I didn't need it anyway. When my dad questioned their reasoning, Gina chimed in, stating that as a guy, I should find my own way, whereas they were women and needed more money for financial security. My dad reminded Gina that he had already taken care of their college funds and now they were also getting a house and a bank account, so they had nothing to worry about. Despite this, Gina kept insisting that I didn't deserve so much money. My dad firmly reiterated that his decision was final. I sat quietly, observing as the argument escalated. Suddenly, Gina burst into tears. We looked at her, startled, and my dad reassured her that there was no need to cry since he had divided everything fairly. Through her sobs, Gina claimed she had kept silent for years to protect the family but couldn't hold it in any longer. The room fell into awkward silence and my dad and I exchanged confused looks. Despite the palpable tension, he gently encouraged Gina to share what was weighing on her mind. Amidst her sobs, Gina began to recount how, a few years ago, I had supposedly tried to force myself on her, but she had kept it hidden to protect me. I was stunned, completely blindsided by the unexpected accusation. Before I could even grasp what was happening, Gina started elaborating on her fabricated story. She told my dad that after our vacation in Greece, where we had an argument about weight and height, I would constantly stare at her and attempt to enter her bedroom uninvited. I sat frozen in my chair as she continued to concoct tales of how I would try to barge in every time she took a shower or get uncomfortably close to her face when we were alone. She claimed she dreaded having me over every weekend because she feared I would behave the same way with the twins. I tried to defend myself, vehemently denying the baseless accusations and yelling at her for having the audacity to make up such lies. But Gina continued to cry as if she were the victim. She went on about how, as I grew older, I made her increasingly uncomfortable and, on one occasion when we were alone, I allegedly tried to force myself on her. My eyes widened in shock, and the blood drained from my face upon hearing such a serious accusation. My dad looked utterly confused and concerned, his eyes darting between me and Gina, clearly at a loss for words. Gina continued her story, claiming she had suffered in silence for years, afraid to speak up for the sake of the family. I yelled at Gina, calling her a psycho, insisting there was no way I had ever looked at her inappropriately, let alone touched her. Gina yelled back that she was done keeping her silence and needed to expose a monster like me. The twins began shouting furiously at me, accusing me of putting their mother through this and using words like rapist and molester. My head was spinning, and it all felt like a bad dream. I couldn't believe how a pleasant evening had turned into such wild accusations. I looked at my dad for support, but he remained quiet, clearly trying to process everything Gina had said. He asked her if what she had spoken was true, and Gina nodded, asserting that she would never lie to him about his own son, and that, as his wife, he should believe her. While I tried to defend myself, My dad asked Gina why she hadn't spoken up earlier. She explained that she feared no one would believe her since I was a minor trying to do inappropriate things with her. As a stepmother who had married my dad, she felt people would dismiss her words. She claimed she had to bear this silently to protect the family. I was crying at this point, begging my dad not to believe her. I never imagined Gina could fabricate such atrocious lies, especially after what she had put me through over the years. Unfortunately, Gina's manipulation had strained my relationship with my dad, and he seemed torn between trusting me and believing his wife. The twins, influenced by their mother's narrative, supported Gina's false accusations and yelled at me to leave their house. I yelled back that it was my dad's place and they shouldn't believe their mother's lies. My dad, amidst the chaos, looked up at me and told me to leave the house until the matter was resolved. Felt like a punch to the gut. Being rejected by my own father, who chose to believe his second wife over me, left me hurt, confused, and betrayed. I packed my belongings and left the home I once thought was mine. I flew straight to my mother, who was shocked to see me at her doorstep. When I told her everything, she was furious and ready to confront my stepmom. But I asked her not to, knowing how unpredictable and dangerous Gina could be. If Gina could concoct such wild lies to get me kicked out of my dad's house because she was upset about the inheritance, she could do much more to ruin my life. I couldn't risk having her in my life any longer, which is why I decided to cut off my dad permanently. Since he chose to believe her, he didn't deserve to have me in his life. Later, my mom told me that my dad called her to express his shame in having a son like me and declared he wanted nothing to do with me. Despite her attempts to defend me, it was in vain. My dad's side of the family, convinced by Gina's story, also attacked my mom, accusing her of raising a pervert. I can't even begin to fathom the pain my mom felt hearing such words about her son. The damage was done and Gina had won. I wish I could say my life improved after cutting her off, but it didn't. Gina and the twins continued bombarding me with vile text messages, threatening that I should stay away from my dad forever. It got so bad that I had to change my number to escape them. Even after that, things didn't get better. Gina's actions left me terrified of being around any woman, fearing I would be falsely accused again and lose my job and career. I was scared to meet anyone or go on dates. Throughout this ordeal, my mom stood by me and believed me. I went through severe depressive and suicidal episodes, and my mom flew in to live with me for a couple of months to make sure I was all right. Slowly, my mental health improved, and I started to rebuild my life. Eventually, I met a wonderful woman named Mara, who brought joy back into my life. She has completely changed my life, and my mom adores her. Mara and my mom mean everything to me, and thanks to them I continue to live my life with purpose. Just a week ago, I received a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be Amazon, I answered. To my shock, it was my dad. I was stunned to hear his voice after nearly 7 years. He sounded old. When I asked how he got my new number, he dodged the question and asked if I was doing okay. I remained silent and then told him not to bother me again since I had nothing to say to him. That's when my dad broke down and started crying. He begged for my forgiveness, admitting how wrong he was to abandon his own son. My curiosity was piqued, so I waited for him to explain. My dad then revealed that Gina had been cheating on him with his best friend for years. When he confronted her with proof, she stopped hiding and confessed she was tired of being married to a pathetic man like him. Gina admitted she had only married him for his money and despised being with him. When my dad pressed her further, she confessed to fabricating all the accusations against me because she hated me and wanted all his wealth for herself and her daughters. As you can imagine, my dad divorced her, and she got nothing from the marriage due to her affair. Despite her lawyers fighting for alimony, my dad said he had been waiting to divorce Gina so he could officially reach out to me and apologize for what he put me through. He expressed his desire to make up for lost time and rebuild our father-son relationship. At the mention of father and son, I couldn't help but scoff. I told him that he was no father of mine after how quickly he abandoned me for his wife's nasty accusations. I told him I wanted nothing to do with him and that he should stop bothering me. I ended the call and hoped he got the message. Since then, I've been bombarded with calls from my dad and his side of the family, who I don't even talk to. saying that my dad has suffered enough and that I'm just making it harder on him. Their messages leave me feeling conflicted. Am I the bad guy for refusing to talk to my dad after he cut me off due to Gina's false accusations? Update 1. My post was locked, but hopefully it's okay now. I've posted the link and tried my best with spacing. I'm on mobile. To everyone who offered support and advice, thank you so much. Your words helped me see things more clearly. I'm not just furious at my dad for believing my stepmother over me, but also for all those years she harassed me while he did nothing to protect me. I was just a child, and she blackmailed and manipulated me while I kept quiet. I think it's time I open up to my mom and let her know exactly what I went through, because I know she'll understand. Update 2. Hi everyone. It's been a week since my last update. For those concerned about my mental health, I'm doing okay. Thank you for your kindness. I booked tickets for my mom to come visit me so I could tell her and Mara everything. They already sensed something was up. I started by telling them about Dad's contact after all these years, which shocked my mom. She asked why he reached out, and I explained. She had no idea he had gone through a divorce and was furious at Gina for what she put everyone through. Then I told them about how Gina would manipulate me when I was just 12 years old. I recounted how she bullied me when Dad wasn't around and threatened to divorce him if I ever told him. I didn't realize how traumatic these events were until I began to open up about them one by one. By the time I finished, I had tears streaming down my face. Mara and my mom were crying quietly as well. My mom immediately hugged me, repeatedly saying that I shouldn't have kept this all in and that it was okay to share. I cried for half an hour while my mom held me. Mara also told me that no child should have gone through what I did, and that it was completely fine if I chose never to speak to my dad again, since he should have protected me. My mom nodded, saying I had no obligations to explain anything to my dad because when I needed him the most, he chose to believe his wife over me. The only reason he was reaching out now was that he was lonely and had no family left. That's when I realized they were right. My dad perhaps never really loved me, because if he did, he would have never believed I was capable of such things. Since then, I felt much lighter after sharing my past with Gina out loud with my mom and Mara. I've blocked my dad and will continue to block any other family member who tries to interject in my life. I owe no explanations to those who chose to abandon me. Update 3. Wow, it's been 6 months since I wrote this post, and I can't believe how much my life has changed since then. I want to start by sharing some happy news. I proposed to Mara and she said yes. My mom is thrilled for us, and we're considering moving closer to her because the schools are better there. Since both of us can work from anywhere, it makes sense for our future family. Thanks to advice from people on Reddit, I've also started therapy. It's helping me feel better, step by step. I'm trying to focus on the positive aspects of my life, like Mara and my mom. They've always been there for me, and I'm deeply grateful for their support. The past has been tough, but I'm looking forward to a brighter future, free from all the lies and drama. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.